A few decades ago, it was marveled at that drugs such as the opiates, including morphine and heroin, meperidine, could have such an exacting influence on the brain's integrity. Then it became known that there were natural factors in the brain that had these actions, and that there were specific sites in the brain that were pre-designed to respond to them. There were the enkephalins and their fragmented portions known as the endorphins, which were derived from the cephalic process and related to morphine. These met a person's need for the suppression of pain. Perhaps there are enkadelics from the psychedelics, and specific N-escalins from mescaline yet to be discovered that might relate to these communicative factors, which might be the natural which might be connected and eventually related to the natural receptor sites in the brain for transcendental communication. Their structures may someday be known. Their functions may someday be understood. There are a multitude of tenuous threads that tie together the fragile structure of the human spirit. The life-giving with the death-demanding side, the exalted voice with the mundane, the strongly centered self with the drive toward dispersion and loss of center. These all coexist in all of us, but there is an essential blockade between these inner worlds which I truly feel can be penetrated only with the words and the tools and the understanding that may be most easily obtained through the area of psychedelic experiences. William Blake said in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, "Man has no body distinct from his soul, for that called body is a portion of soul, discerned by the five senses. The chief inlets of soul in this age, energy is the only life and is from the body, and reason is the bound or outward circumference of energy. Energy is eternal delight." These are responses to a heartfelt need for some vocabulary, to allow the establishment of a dialogue that might diffuse the accelerating mad moves toward extinction. My personal philosophy might well be lifted directly from Blake. I must create a system or be slaved by another man's. I may be wrong, but I must do what I'm doing. And I will do what I can as fast as I can.
As you could tell, Sasha became a little emotional at the end, and on the copy of this talk that I received in 1984, over in the left margin on the last page was written, "Here he started to cry." Well, back then, in Dallas, the legend was that the copy of the talk that we had was actually Ann Shulgin's copy, and that she had written those words in the margin. But a few years ago, I showed my copy to Ann, and she said that it wasn't her handwriting. But anyway, it really was a thrill for me to hear the end of that talk right now, just particularly because he ad-libbed a bit at the end that didn't follow his written text. And as I was listening to Sasha just now, I was obviously following along in my old copy of his talk, one that was first given to me in 1984. And it was interesting to see that Sasha actually delivered this talk in a more extemporaneous manner than I'd expected. It looks to me like he must have first written the essay and then used his outline of it to deliver the talk. And if you'd like to see a copy of the essay yourself, you can find it in the introductory information in Ann and Sasha's book, To Call. And by the way, be sure to keep in mind that the talk you just heard was given in 1983. At the time, there was no arrowwood.org to go to. In fact, there wasn't even a World Wide Web back then. Information like this just simply didn't exist in ways that reached more than a handful of individuals. And also, since the governments of the world have copied the fascists in Washington, and now all of these compounds are prohibited that he talked about, including ones that haven't even been invented yet, a lot of things have changed since then. But what a screwed up political setup we humans have come up with, huh? Oh well, there's not much to do about that other than just to keep your head down and stay under the radar. I guess I should have mentioned that this tape has been played a lot, and so the sound quality of Sasha's voice, and Terence's voice in a minute, isn't as true as it most likely was when the tape was new, but thankfully we at least have the overall flavor of the moment. And before I forget it, did you notice that Sasha stated that Albert Hofmann consumed the first intentional dose of LSD on the 19th of April at 4:20 p.m.? Maybe that's the origin of 420 in the wonderful world of cannabis lore. I know there are a number of explanations for the origin of 420, but now I'm going to vote for the reference to Dr. Hoffman's famous bicycle ride as my choice. Now on the second part of today's program, which originally was going to be the entire program before I discovered Sasha on the other side of the tape that you're about to hear, the talk I'm going to play now is one that I had heard about for quite some time. Like many of our fellow saloners, one of my favorite things to do is to sit around a fire with some friends, pass a pipe around, and talk about people we know and places we've been to. And quite often the name Terence McKenna pops up along with the question, when did you first hear him speak? For some of you, including my wife Mary C., that first exposure to the Bard McKenna came at the conference on psychedelics and spirituality that Robert Gordon McClutchan organized in Santa Barbara back in 1983. And what a conference that must have been. I haven't been able to find out much about it on the web, and hopefully some of our fellow saloners who were there will write and fill in the details for us. But I do know that in addition to Sasha, the other speakers included Albert Hoffman, Richard Evans Schultes, Carl Ruck, Andrew Weil, Ralph Metzner, and many others. There was one speaker, however, who canceled at the last moment. And in his place, the conference organizers told the audience that they had replaced the absent speaker with this new guy, a guy named Terence McKenna. And the rest, as they say, is history. It's interesting to me that out of all the great luminaries on the program, the people who were actually the reason my wife and her friends went to the conference to see, well, all of those talks by all of those wonderful people have faded over time into only dim memories. But the talk by this new guy, McKenna, well, that's the only talk that seems to have really stuck in the minds of many of the people who were there. Now, I think that Terence had actually begun making public appearances a few years before this, but this seems to be the very first talk he gave at a major conference, and it was from here that his legend began to grow in earnest. The title of the talk on the tape is shown as Hallucinogens Return to the Logos, but as you're about to hear, Terence also had two other titles for it.
I was originally going to call this talk Monkeys Discover Hyperspace, but I decided that was a little outrageous, and I settled on hallucinogens before and after psychology. So before I dig into that subject, I'll say a bit about how I come to have an interest in these substances and their very peculiar effects. Years and years ago, after an LSD trip, I imagined that I perceived a relationship between the LSD experience and the motifs of Tibetan religious art. And accordingly, I went to Nepal and took up residence in a village of Tibetan refugees. And I quickly learned that the shamanism that I wanted to study was inaccessible for reasons of language, for reasons such as that the Buddhists who were teaching me Tibetan looked askance at the shaman that I wanted to associate with. And I realized then that the association between shamanism and hallucinogens is such that both, in a way, are taboo. And when you deal with pre-literate cultures, you discover that the shaman is a very peculiar figure. He is critical to the functioning of the psychological and social life of his community, but in a way he's always peripheral to it. He lives at the edge of the village. He is only called upon in matters of great social crisis. He is feared and respected. And this might be a description of these hallucinogenic substances. They are feared and respected. They are misunderstood. They are only called upon often in moments of great crisis, and they are a persistent but always peripheral part of the community.